What's on guys, we're back with a brand new video. In today's video we're going to be going over players that you guys have given me and I'll be rating them to see if I reckon that they're overrated or underrated in the AFL. If you guys want to be in future videos, make sure to go down to the description and go to my Instagram, because that's where I got all these questions, these comments or questions, whatever you want to call it, from. So if you guys want to be in future videos, come when we're doing other videos and involve you guys that watch these videos. So make sure to drop a like and a subscribe, go down to my Instagram, follow that, and yeah, so without further ado, make sure to drop a like and a subscribe. We're so close to 550 and we're on the road to 600 subscribers. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. First up, from Ryan, we do have Shane Edwards, and I reckon this man is underrated. He's such an important part to the Tigers team, and if he was in there, then I don't reckon they would have all the flags that they do. That's how important he is. He's a link man. He can go into the midfield. He's so versatile. You know, he can go to half back, go half forward, can go wing. He's a very, very good goal kicker. Got his disposals. He's been around for so long for this team. He's one of the older Richmond players they still have in their team. Played in all of the premierships, and he's definitely underrated. And you know, he's one of the only Richmond players over these periods that's actually been All-Australian. He was an All-Australian in 2018. So yeah, I reckon he is underrated. Next up is by Sammy Gerbert, and he said Jordan Ridley. I reckon Jordan Ridley's underrated. He's very, very underrated because of how young he is and how good he is already. I think it's because I think he was drafted in 2017. I could be wrong with that. But he came in and barely played any games his first couple of years. But 2020 is his first time he really got a good chance. And geez, did he show his potential, being a very, very good player for them. Last year being great interceptor, can still, you know, have some run up half back for being an interceptor. And definitely will just improve. I think he's only like 21 or 22 years old, so still has a lot of footy about him. Will be one of the best half backs, and I would not be surprised if he's an All-Australian in 2021, so he is definitely underrated. Next up is by Ron for Lions, and he said Hunter Clark, and I reckon Hunter Clark, he's actually getting some hype around him now, since people are starting to recognise him because of how good St Kilda have been, probably for the past year and a bit. Yeah, so Hunter Clark has been a halfback his whole career. With this season so far, he went to the midfield against the Giants, played very, very good, and is just a very high impactful player. Whenever he gets the ball, he does something with it. His ability to, like, you know, kick on both feet. He almost plays like Scott Pendlebury, of how he slows down the game, everything slows down around him. So I reckon Hunter Clark is underrated. Next up is by Code Word, and he said Jack Crisp. Now, Jack Crisp is a weird one. I don't know if he's underrated or underrated. I reckon, you know, he's kind of fairly rated, but I'm going to have to say underrated because he's still a very, very important part of this team and goes under the radar. I'm not sure if he's ever been All-Australian, but he definitely should have been. And if he's never been one, he's definitely underrated. He's one of the best halfbacks in the league. You know, he's one of the players that, you know, gathers them 30 possessions of halfback, sets up the game, and he's one of the halfbacks that I've ever seen. He hits the scoreboard so often. He hit the scoreboard on the weekend against the Western Bulldogs. So his ability to hit the scoreboard off halfback, he's a great runner. He gathers a lot of touches, and even sometimes he goes into the midfield and he does the work that he can in there. Very, very underrated. Next up is by Mist, and he said Cam Zerha. Did not spell it right, but I know what he's talking about. And I reckon, I don't know about Cam Zerha. I've got to give him the underrated, but he's on the verge of overrated because over the past, probably like, you know, this season so far in the preseason, he's been very, very hyped up to be this big bull. Even though he does do that, he's, you know, compared to the Goey, and I don't know if he's on the same level as the Goey. You know, like they have a similar play style. But he's not as good on the scoreboard end of things. So I'm going to go. I originally went underrated, but the more and more I think about it, I think right now he's not showing enough. So I'm going to go overrated. My first overrated. I don't hate the player. I actually love watching Cam Zerha, but he gets hyped up a lot for a player that hasn't really accomplished anything in the AFL so far. Next up is by Young Dunn. He's gone with Ben Cunnington. Now Ben Cunnington, he's been out of the game for a year, so people forget about him. I even forgot about him to put him in the elite players list, and people criticise me for that. But to be honest, I haven't seen much footy from this man, so it felt like Buddy Franklin. A lot of people write Buddy Franklin off these days, but 3 or 4 years ago, he was probably one of the best players in the AFL. I just had times change, but I reckon Ben Cunnington is definitely underrated. Doesn't get talked about enough for being a good of a contested player he is. I don't think he played on the weekend, or he might have. I didn't really watch that North game, if I'm completely honest with you. But he's going to be healthy this season when he comes back, or he already played. And I expect him to have a great season, so I reckon he's very, very underrated. Next up is by, I don't know how to say that name, sorry, but your name's on the screen, and I've gone with Clayton Oliver. He's chosen for me, so I reckon Clayton Oliver is very underrated, but he still has a lot of improvement to do. Now, Clayton Oliver, he's a weird one. Some people rate him very highly, some people don't even talk about him, but I'm going to have to go underrated simply because of his impact, his ability to just change games. He's been on a steady progress over his career, getting an All-Australian in 2017 or 2018, I can't remember what year it was, but it was around that, like a couple of years into his career, which is ridiculous. One of the best ball winners in the AFL, so I'm going to have to go underrated. Next up is by Sam, and he's on Pat Lepinski. Now, Pat Lepinski is a very, very good footballer, but doesn't get talked about enough because of how stacked that midfield is. Even though he does play more of a half-forward role for the Bulldogs, his ability to, run to the midfield, and I reckon he probably will play a lot more midfield if he's at any other team. And to be honest, I'm not surprised that this bloke hasn't tried to change teams. He was very, very good last year for the Bulldogs. Played a lot of games. He's one of the Bulldogs midfielders that can actually hit the scoreboard and give him a bit of a chop out. I reckon he'll probably rotate with, the bit of the Bont and Josh Dunkley that can actually hit the scoreboard like Pat Lepinski, so I'm going to go underrated. Next up is by Sam again, and he's got Lin Zhong. This one is just straight overrated. And I'll be completely honest with you, I know he's a bit of a cult figure, but, when we're being honest around here, he's overrated. I never really saw much from him, even when he was, in the team in 2016. Has not played football, it feels like forever, so I'm going to have to go overrated. Next up is by Quinn, and he's going with Caleb Sarong. Underrated. Caleb Sarong is definitely underrated. The only people ever talk about from that draft class is, Matt Rao. But Caleb Sarong, the NAB Rising Star winner, and I don't hear anyone ever talk about this young man in the best young players or anything like that. He reminds me a lot of young Lachie Neale, so if he turns to anything like Lachie Neale, Fremantle have a player on their hands, unless they don't trade him like they did with Lachie Neale. But, they move, very, very underrated, and I really rate him as a player. Next up is by Big Will Phillips, and he's gone with the Goey. The Goey is a very, very good player, a superstar talent, but he's just not consistent enough, and every Pies fan, thrives about the Goey. And even the Goey, I reckon, overrates himself by asking for $1 million over 5 years, which is just completely not what the Goey's worth. So I'm going to go with overrated. Next up is by Bombers Fly Up, and he said Sam Draper. Now, Sam Draper is, one of the best, probably young ruckmen in the AFL. He gets put in the conversation a lot, but quite frankly, he hasn't proven too much of anything so far. He's a cult figure, so usually, when cult figures get built up like this, they usually, show a lot. I reckon he is, the highest of highest potential, but he's only played, the 9 games for his career, and he's shown, a decent amount. He's a very, very tall unit. He's playing all right so far, but he's had so much time, to come up and show what he can do at AFL level. But right now, I'm going to have to go overrated. Now, Essendon fans, before you jump in the comments and dislike the video, don't get me wrong, I love him as a player. I reckon he's going to be good. But I'm talking about right now, after 9 games, he's a bit overrated. Because in the games he has played last year, he did not look too great. I remember in the last game of the season, they had to chuck him out of the ruck because he was getting absolutely dominated. And Joe Danaher, in the last game of the season, did a better effort in the ruck than Sam Draper. So that's not something you want your young ruckman to be, getting around. But so far, he did play pretty good against the Hawks, even though he was double teamed. And this year is the year, his big year to be the #1 ruckman. And I really like it. I love this young Essendon team, but I'm going to have to go overrated for right now. But, I look back on this at the end of the year and he's an All-Australian ruckman, and I actually would not be surprised. So next up is from an actually YouTube comment, because I did put in the comments of a video, comment down below some players. So he's going with Andrew Brazill, and straight away, no questions asked, underrated. I feel like early on people writ him off as being not that great of a player early days, because the first year or two he didn't look too great first up. But the past couple of years he had a breakout year in 2020 and looked superb in the first game of the season against Melbourne. Next up is by Venomous Pickle, and he's gone with Sam Simpson. Now Sam Simpson is a very good player, but so far in his career he's been more of a role player. He did have that game earlier in the year where he grabbed 27 disposals against Brisbane, I'm pretty sure. So I'm gonna give him the underrated, but I don't think he's gonna be anything special in his career. But he's a very, very good role player, I have to say. Next up is by Hi, and he's going with Lachie Hunter. Now Lachie Hunter gets overshadowed in that midfield because of how many midfielders the Bulldogs have. Very, very good winger. Probably is one of the best wingers in the competition. Great user by foot. Probably the best user by foot in that midfield. And, elite runner, one of the best runners in the competition. We'll have to go underrated. Next up is by Hi again, and he's going with Jack Viney. Jack Viney is a weird one. He could be classed at overrated or underrated. I can see arguments for both. But I reckon he's underrated. Early days he was a very, very good contested player. It felt like when he became captain in 2019, he didn't look too great. It looks like he took the captaincy too seriously, kind of fell away, but he's back to his best, and he's very underrated. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to drop a like and a subscribe. We're on the road to 600 subscribers.